So
yeah, I love that story. So these are like some of our like greatest hits, like spreads from the first issue. Yeah, it's like you get the new person you've never heard of, but then also like the deep cut that like you wish you had heard of, like all in the same place.
culture is not just fashion or music or pop culture, celebrity culture, or weird things on the internet. It's all of it, right? You know, what we're building on ID is really this intersection of all of that, because they can converge. Culture converges. So that's what ID always was, a reflection of culture through the 80s, through 90s, and now here in 2025, you know, through Thom's leadership, like that's really what he is driving of how ID tells those stories today, and how we build a business that also can tell stories for our brand partners and for the talent that want to come share their stories at ID.
I immediately kind of understood the approach because it had a very similar kind of like DIY spirit, fiercely independent, but also like able to kind of like achieve really amazing and surprisingly monumental things. In a way, like a lot of the spirit of it felt familiar to me.
Well, I think that's the thing, is like you also grew up in the sort of like the golden days of media, and I think we have such different sort of journeys to reach this point, but I was so inspired by Thom's incredibly innovative approach to sort of how we drive publishing forward.
It was funny because I called Karlie and I was like, Karlie, like I have this idea of who should be on the first cover, and she was like, who? And I was like, well, you don't know who she is. And she was like, okay, well, like what's her name or whatever. Like, no, we're gonna find someone who like none of us know who they are and put them on the cover. It was a really funny conversation, and like I think the kind of thing that like we immediately both got, like how ID that is, and like how, you know, because if you look at the history in the archive, it's like, you know, not only like Naomi Campbell and FKA Twigs, who were on the other two covers, they appeared for the first time on the cover of ID. So we kind of like created that like chain kind of like with the history. Think of ID as a legacy brand, but it's like the legacy is about being irreverent and creative and outside of the box. It's not a legacy brand in that kind of oldie moldy way where it's about like tradition. It's actually kind of about breaking the rules a little bit.
And in a very full circle way, actually I have to brag for her. She just signed with IMG Models. She's from Ohio, I'm from Missouri. You know, she's now embarking on this career thanks to the sort of opportunity and the risk that Thom took.
You know, I'm a magazine nerd, you know, and I never went to school for how to make magazines. And so the way that I learned about magazines is I would actually go and buy like on eBay these like lots of like 30 issues of ID. So I had this like giant stack of like print material like in my room as a kid that I would just like leaf through. And so like that was kind of how I encountered ID. And then interestingly enough, my first boss in the magazine world, Jorg Koch from 032C, he actually worked for Terry and Tricia, and like they were kind of mentors to him when he was starting that magazine. And so like in this day and age, like you kind of need to be a storyteller as a brand, no matter if you're like a publisher or if you're selling t-shirts or you're selling someone else's t-shirts or selling jewelry. Like you need to give people, you need to build a community through stories, you know, in order to kind of have a group of people around you. So I think like in a way, you know, whether it's in publishing or in fashion, like a lot of the dynamics of like how ideas move through the internet are actually really similar. What we've been focused on is creating a really strong community around ID, or around like the stories we tell, the people that we work with, the people that love the brand. And then once you kind of have that really like captive community, it's like they'll go to an event that you'll do. They'll buy like a t-shirt collab that you make. They'll, you know, like, so I think in a way you kind of start with that community and that kind of shared storytelling thing. And then like you can kind of work from there into like any direction that you want to go or that feels right.
You know, I think this is where it's like the gatekeepers of our industry, like those gates have been torn down. What you see somebody wearing at a concert, like I see images and I'm like, they have better taste and style than like the most, you know, famous XYZ person. It's like, and that is part of what I think is so exciting of like, how do we tell that in print and digital, in fast ways and in slow ways?
You know, I think with the second issue, in a way, there's like a lot more freedom, you know, in the sense that like, I think the first issue, we really wanted to be like a thesis statement on what we're about. And then, you know, now I just feel like we're just cooking. Like we're just like following the things that are really like attracting us in culture. Because I think in a way we kind of like, we decided a lot of things about what the new version of the magazine is about with that first issue. And so now it's kind of just about like, you know, content-wise, just about kind of getting down to business.
Have I been told
I don't think I know the secret.
the baby cover?
Oh, it's happening.
We had a really funny idea a couple weeks back where we were talking about what is kind of like the generation that's kind of being born today, like what their experience of the world is going to be. Like what is 2025 going to feel like to someone who was like born in 2025. And so then we had this idea of like born in 2025 of actually having a cover star who's like an infant on the cover, and to like, you know, use that as an occasion for, you know, people within our creative sphere to almost like give advice to someone who was born this year. And like, what would that advice look like? What's like kind of like optimistic way of kind of like looking at our world today from the eyes of someone who has like a blank slate? And so in a way, like that kind of is similar to what Enza was in the first issue. It almost became kind of like part of the thesis of the magazine, is this idea of like there being this kind of opportunity to turn a new leaf in culture, you know, and to kind of think about that also through the lens of people who have like been really seminal in like defining the way the culture is now, you know, because I think in a way, like when someone makes a really big impact on culture, it's almost like you can't really imagine what the world was like before they were there.
You know, from day one, I've been so excited about sort of like Thom's brain and the sort of value system and kindness with which you lead, how you are thinking about both very much driving ID forward, but not at the cost of like its heart, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think like something that Karlie and I share is like we both believe in the magic of magazines, and that like 2 + 2 = 5 when it comes to just like taking a picture and putting it on the cover of something. You know, it's like it can change a person's life, or it can, you know, define a moment in history or whatever. And so I think like that's something that we really have a shared appreciation and also like reverence towards, is like, you know, sort of like what does it mean to like make a magazine or to be a platform like ours today, I think is kind of like a big part of how we frame what we're doing and how we think about the future. When it comes to, you know, how we kind of approach the issue from a partnerships perspective, you know, we're really looking for ways to kind of like integrate our partners in ways that feel organic. You know, so something that we love doing is like coming up with a cool or crazy idea and then like seeing who wants to get in on it, you know, rather than getting a brief and trying to like do the limbo dance of like fitting into whatever that brief is. And we've seen a lot of like receptive attitude towards that, because like I think oftentimes like the right idea will always find the right partner if you kind of like know who to talk to about it. We worked with Torso, which is a really amazing photography duo based in Paris. I first got to know their work because they were, you know, one half of Dis magazine, which was like a really influential kind of like publication that operated on the boundaries of like art and fashion. That was like really influential to me when I was becoming an editor. And they now do like really amazing campaigns for like Mugler and like all these incredible brands. They did this incredible video for like Charlie XCX where like she's beating up the paparazzi person in Charles de Gaulle airport. And we had started talking about it because like they really love these kind of like out of the box ideas and also figuring out how to bring it to life. So like, you know, our first call, we were like, okay, like we love this idea of like an infant on the cover. How do we get it to wink? You know, like all these kind of questions, like, you know, like it's really great to have like creatives who are down to kind of problem solve with you rather than think of ways in which things like can't work. One of the first stories we started working on at the beginning of the issue was with Telfar, the brand and the person. I had this kind of like crazy kind of like time warp moment where I was like looking at this campaign they had done a couple years ago, and in it had like established in 2005 on the copy, and I was like, 2005, like what? Like Telfar's been around for 20 years. And so like that kind of realization, like I started talking with them and really almost like developing this way of like, how do you tell the story of like 20 years of a brand that's been like so fiercely independent, you know, and is also like the biggest like Black-owned fashion brand in America, and like, you know, how they were able to kind of build that from the ground up and really kind of like be fiercely independent in every single step of the process. And so that was really fascinating for us too, because I think a lot of our audience are, young people, but in particular young people who are aspiring creatives, and so in a way, like being able to successfully start a brand and have it exist for 20 years is kind of like, the equivalent of like getting to be an astronaut and flying to the moon for like this generation, and I think similar in our first issue with like the Rick Owens story, like so many people kind of like modeled their approach to creativity and to culture around what Rick did. And so I think providing these kinds of templates, I think, similar to what we're doing with the archive too, where it's like that's its own kind of template for people to follow, I think really kind of like helps open source culture and like promote this like DIY spirit that's so integral to ID. That's something that we really have a shared appreciation and also like reverence towards, is like, sort of like what does it mean to like make a magazine or to be a platform like ours today? I think it's kind of like a big part of how we frame what we're doing and how we think about the future.
I think something that we both care deeply about is like democratizing access. We both were like, one of the first things we have to do is digitize the archive because it's one of our greatest assets.
Not only did we want to digitize the archive, we wanted to digitize it and like really give the public access to it, because I think that ID, it was founded on this kind of like DIY idea of like, hey, there isn't a magazine in the world that I feel like represents the culture I'm in. I'm just going to make my own. What we want to do is to kind of like give other people that idea by seeing how, the Joneses did it, and to have access to all this kind of like cultural material. And, I was at like a book fair recently, and like so many magazines, even from like the 2000s, like not even that old, are like hundreds of dollars because it's like got some amazing photo shoot in it or whatever. So I like this idea of kind of like taking that gatekeeping away and just being like, okay, like look at all of it. We were really inspired when we were first looking at old issues about, they had a page in a lot of the issues that was kind of like, like in old magazines you could like write in a card and like order something like through mail order. So they would have that for like ID t-shirts and stuff like that. We obviously like have scans of like the major capstone photo shoots of ID history already, but like I think seeing all that connective tissue within the old issues is like a really special like reading experience for people.
You think about the decades of work, not just covers, but all of the stories, written stories, visual stories, and by the way, advertising that is so fascinating to look at and to study and has never been seen by many generations, my own included. It wasn't if, but how do we digitize the archive? So we actually sent it to a few different, we trialed with a few different scanners around the world because we really wanted to preserve the integrity of the magazines because it's thousands of pages, and there's some issues where like we only have one, and so I think we were really wanting to make sure.
And they're really expensive on eBay.
Yeah, exactly. One of my favorite issues, I actually was able to find the original hand-stapled first issue. I have to bring it in. Have you seen it?
I've seen it in the London office.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, it's amazing. But this is where it's just like the stories, and then to hear it from Terry and Tricia, how it all started. It really was a startup. And here we are 45 years later, sort of wanting to continue to do justice to sort of the initial intent and vision that Terry and Tricia really started out on, and how does that manifest in the world today?
We're currently working on like launching a radio show that's going to be kind of moving into new digital arenas. And then business-wise, there's so many different directions to go in. Like, like we're working with lots of brands on storytelling projects ranging from like, sort of like co-branded editorial all the way to kind of like fully like A to Z white label projects as well. And also like, for the idea as a brand, like, thinking about ways that feel authentic, that we can kind of like mobilize this community we have, whether that's events or like classes or different places where you can have a touch point with ID. And also things like, something we were researching recently is like this incredible history of ID merch, where you had people from like Helmut Lang to like Raf Simons to like, all these incredible designers like have made like merch for the magazine. So it's like, maybe we kind of start that up again. So like I think we're sort of like just getting started when it comes to those pieces of it.
And I think thinking about how do we best think first principles in this moment of how do we reach people where they are in a democratized way, in a high quality way? How do we think about serving our brand partners? It comes down to what's right for ID. We are different for sure, and like yet that's part of I think what makes our partnership around ID so meaningful is that we're thinking about it from different vantage points. And I think for me, you know, I feel so honored to have this sort of opportunity to help shepherd ID into this next evolution of what a fashion media publication and iconic title can be in the world today, how to help prove that it can survive and does deserve to exist, and the importance not only for the whole ecosystem of fashion, but that it actually can be a real business too. That to me is something I think Thom and I really connected on, both in terms of just like, how do we build this as a business, and also how do we do justice to sort of the roots and the DNA of what ID has always been, but for the audience today, for the media platforms today, but not losing sight or losing sort of connection to what it always has been. And I think that's the task that Thom really signed up for. It's Thom's editorial vision. Like, I'm just here to support on the sort of more like business side of things, which is more what I think I get excited about. Like, this is your domain and your creative world.
You get so much traction from like doing the first article on like an actor or the first article on like a new band or whatever, like in a way that you wouldn't expect compared to like much more famous people who are also on the platform. And so it's not just like a hunch or like a ideology, it's also just like objectively like what the audience wants. Collaboratively, like that's been like such a great thing about working with Karlie is like, you know, because we talk like at least once a week, and you know, day to day.
I bother you all the time.
Yeah, I know, we text even more than that. But it's like, you know, day to day, it's like so many bits of news are happening, so many things are going live, and like it's so amazing to kind of like put your head above the water and be like, okay, like what's our vision? Like what do we want this brand to be? Like how do we create a business that's actually conducive to the kind of brand we want to be? You know, and so those types of bigger picture questions, I think it's always so important to kind of continually tap into those as a creative person, as a marketer, as a business person, because like otherwise you can kind of get like a little bit lost in like getting from point A to point B without thinking about what it all means. And I've always been like a fan of thinking about what it all means, and so is Karlie. The thing is, like, every new idea needs that first place that's willing to give it a spotlight. It needs that first place where it appears as legit, you know, because like ideas are so nebulous. And I think also like, especially in fashion, like they want to do something after someone else says it's cool.
We say next generation talent. That's not just who's on the cover and who's shooting it, but it's also the designers. You know, this is a very, very tough business to break into and to build a business in. And so I think celebrating Telfar in this milestone moment, but also, I mean, daily, the content that you guys do and create to tell stories of Central St. Martin students, you know, launching their collections, and I mean, countless examples of this. And I think this is sort of the value system and DNA that was very much Tricia and Terry, and that sort of very inception of ID that was sort of, I think, really what guided how they wanted to build this. And it's something that we take very seriously, and I think it's integral to who Thom is and who I am. And, you know, I see the way that Thom and Steph as well, like, think about the kids, right? It's like they don't even have to necessarily go through it. I think this is where it's just like great ideas and talent can come from anyone, anywhere.